So welcome one and all to Live from One Cancer Place, the most unique approach to patient and caregiver education from cancer world that you can possibly find. Today is a very, very special edition, if you will, of One Cancer Place. We're featuring Dr. Christopher Heery, who is our marvelous teacher and guest host for all of our continuing productions of Live. He engages in jargony conversation with our special guests, and then he will stop that conversation and turn to us and give us a teaching moment. Now, I first learned of Dr. Heery from a patient, actually, his patient. She came to me and said, there is a doctor that you need to know about. He's my oncologist. He's absolutely magnificent. And I think you should meet him. We unfortunately lost Rachel to colon cancer about 5 years ago. But subsequently, I was introduced to Dr. Heery by Dr. John Marshall, one of our all-time GI favorites. Julie Johnson, who is a KAPA member of One Cancer Place, is a sarcoma patient and also a brand manager from one of our major packaged goods companies in this country. She is going to play the role of questioner, representing all the questions that we've assembled to ask Dr. Chris.
Well, Dr. Chris, we are so glad that you are with us today. Before we begin, on behalf of all of us at One Cancer Place, we just want to say thank you. You literally are the glue to some of our live discussions. We're so thankful for your dedication to patient education and advocacy. So I personally am thrilled to be able to turn the tables on you and get a chance to learn more about you and just hear about your perspective on oncology and patient education and advocacy. So we surveyed our One Cancer Place community members. So just know that today, all of the questions that are coming your way were picked by patients and caregivers on One Cancer Place. So let's go ahead and get started. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and what your career in medicine has looked like to date?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I went into medicine largely, honestly, I was sort of cajoled into going into medicine by my grandmother. When I went to college, I was actually determined about halfway through that I did not want to, driven by the fact that most physicians that I had interacted with at that point in my life were primary care doctors or, someone in the ER. I didn't really know what life would look like as a everyday, going to work doctor. But I knew, I had heard a lot of things about reimbursement and having to check boxes just to be able to do your job every day. And that's not really the way I like to work at all. I graduated a semester early from college, largely just to save money. I went to a pretty expensive college, and the second semester, I thought I was just going to be able to hang out with my friends and my dad and mom would pay the bills. And I found out that that was not the deal. And instead I had to get a job. I could stay living, with all my friends, but I had to have a job. And so for like 3 weeks, I was a valet at the university hospital where I went to college, which is Duke University Hospital, which is only a stone's throw from where I'm sitting right now. And that was terrible. And luckily, I had this idea that I had always thought about being a teacher. And so I wanted to find out if there was something that I could do that would make me want to do that. And so I thought, well, this is an opportunity. Maybe I can be a coach at one of the local schools for a basketball team because I love basketball. And I was, I guess, the only person who interviewed because I got this job as the 7th and 8th grade girls basketball coach at a local middle school. And through a crazy series of events, my best player, her father was a practicing medical oncologist who does clinical research. And his name's Henry Friedman. He's pretty well known in the world of glioblastoma. And watching him and his team, what they did every day, I was like, okay, I would love to do that. That looks really interesting. So medicine went from this thing that was sounds kind of like boring, checking a lot of boxes to me, to trying to invent new solutions to problems and helping patients find something that could give them hope. So I ended up going to medical school and interestingly went to a medical school where research isn't a super high priority. I went to East Carolina University, which is a great school for primary care, for becoming a good physician. It's a fantastic place, but not a lot of research. So I knew my priority when I left was to find in residency and fellowship places that would let me see that side of clinical medicine that is translational, meaning taking new ideas and putting them into the clinic, and something that would solve big picture problems. So ended up at the University of Illinois in Chicago for residency, and that allowed me to get into what ended up being a dream scenario for my fellowship in oncology, which is the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda. Honestly, I don't even know that I had any idea how perfectly suited that place would be for me and what I wanted to do. Sometimes naivety is the best tool to get where you want to go. You just follow your nose. And in that case, I say all the time, I would absolutely, if money were no object, I would still work at the National Cancer Institute. It is such a magical place to work. It's such a great experience for patients. Every patient that goes there, all costs are covered, travel is covered. And so we only run clinical trials for new therapeutics, new ideas. And so I spent all of my time there working on things that I otherwise would not have had access to and people that I wouldn't have had access to. So I just, I'm forever grateful that I had that opportunity. And it was there that I learned about using the immune system to attack cancer. And one of the things that really helped me in what we are doing now for One Cancer Place, to just learn how to turn complicated ideas into layman speak, was that I didn't really understand any of those ideas. And so I had to go ask. I'd read these protocols and I didn't know anything about them. So I'd just go ask people. And when they would say a bunch of stuff, I'd say, I don't know what that means. Say it simpler. And I would just keep saying it until they said something that made sense. And over time, I was able to build a foundation of relatively difficult concepts into things that I could explain to, anyone who was willing to pay attention long enough, I guess. Not necessarily anyone, because these are still complicated ideas. But as Erica knows, there are certain basic concepts in biology and oncology that you have to understand the core principles before you can understand the next question and the next question. And so being able to put those things and draw them on paper is a really big part of what I learned while I was there. And also just incredible access to people who would argue about these very complicated ideas, like it was whether or not you should have, frosted mini wheats or Honey Nut Cheerios in the morning. Like it was just the most basic thing to them was cancer biology. So again, just super lucky to do that. I ended up staying at NCI for about 7 years and then went into the biotech industry about 6 years ago. And the primary motivation, if I'm being totally honest, was that we had just had our third kid and we couldn't afford to continue living in Bethesda and paying for a tiny house. However, since at that time, I had to make a very serious introspective thought process around, is this really what I want to do? Is this really how I want to live my life? And it turns out, I heard this from a lot of people who had done it, you get to make a very big impact on a lot of people's lives in the biotech pharma world. So the transition was different in certain ways than I thought it would be, but it has held true that I really am excited about what I do every day because I get to influence new therapies, potentially getting to more patients more rapidly.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Obviously, your willingness to lead our live conversations at One Cancer Place really demonstrates your dedication to patients, and particularly patient education. You talked about breaking down some of those more complex topics. Can you talk a little bit about why you think it's so important for patients to be educated around their diagnosis? And you also mentioned, a few topics that you feel like patients really need to know. What would those be?
There's not just a few. I mean, I think understanding what cancer is, having a definition that's a sentence or two of what cancer is a really helpful thing for most patients. Obviously, people can have slightly different spin on it, but being able to say very briefly to someone who has no idea what cancer is, but knows that it's scary, what cancer means is a really important first step. So the sort of the broad definition I tend to tell people is that you have some cells in your body that have stopped following the rules and they're growing in a way that is not appropriate and they're causing pressure on the things around them. And when you say it like that, I think people can go, oh, wait, so I never really thought about how cancer kills somebody, right? I mean, most people, they know it's scary, but they don't really know what the damage that it does is or how it does that damage. And so that's a very useful image, I think, for most people. You just think there's a collection of cells somewhere that are just growing too fast and pushing on other stuff. And then people can say, oh, I've never really thought about what all the stuff in my body does, but you can imagine that certain parts of your body, if a tumor is growing in it, are much more likely to have a problem than others, right? So if you have a tumor that grows in the middle of your belly somewhere, it can grow pretty big before it really causes a huge problem. But if you have one that grows right along an airway and pushes against it and you can't breathe, that's a huge problem, right? So I think that's a core concept. That's a very basic thing that people need to understand. The other thing that I tell most patients is to tell your doctor from the beginning that you want to know the honest truth about the likelihood of certain outcomes. So if you have metastatic, breast cancer or you have metastatic colon cancer, one of the first conversations you should have is not how long do I have to live, but it should be something along the lines of, what is the likelihood that I'm going to be cured of this disease doing the standard therapies that are out there? What's the chances? And if they're honest with you, they're going to tell you extremely low, right? Because I think most people, they hear cancer and they don't differentiate sort of like, is this curable or is this not curable? That should be the very first question, right? Should be like, can I cure this thing or can I not? If it's curable, I want to know what's the likelihood of cure. And I want to know, like, how extreme should I go for that likelihood, right? So if I have a 92% chance of cure with the most basic treatment that's pretty easy to tolerate, and I can push that to 95% chance of cure by doing the most extreme thing, maybe I don't want to do the most extreme thing because that 3% just isn't worth it to me. But that is a patient's choice. And patients have to know to ask the right questions to be involved in that choice. So that's another really, I think, key thing for patients to take into consideration. Now, the other end of the spectrum is just as important. If I have a 0% or up to 2% chance of cure, and I can do the most extreme thing that might push it to 30%, hey, if it were me, I'd probably do it, right? So again, that's really up to individuals, but you have to know enough to ask the right question about, and this does come down a little bit to like statistics and probabilities, and most patients don't have a background in that math, but they can understand it if you break it down into simpler terms. So the last thing is getting deep into biology, and that's a lot harder. That's sort of next generation stuff. That's what we're trying to do here, is help people understand some of these really confusing concepts around why do cells behave a certain way, or why do certain subpopulations of patients with certain cancers have certain outcomes and others do not. that requires a lot more time and energy. And I mean, YouTube can be a good way to find that. Can also be a great way to find nonsense. So you have to be really careful. And I think it's really important to tell patients to go to sources that are of known value. And then after that, you can build on these biology concepts.
So from your perspective, what do you think are the most underutilized resources that are available to patients today?
I would say if there's one thing I would tell most patients to do, it would be when you have your diagnosis and you know what cancer you have, go and find the advocacy foundation that cares about that particular cancer, not just like all cancer. But you'd be surprised. I mean, almost any even rare cancer, there's somebody out there who cares and wants to help you find the right treatment, wants to help you find the right doctor. I work on the board of a super rare cancer foundation like that, dedicated to helping patients navigate, finding the right physician, travel, etc. So patient navigation services, I would say, are the most underutilized because there are people out there. And the funny thing about those is the more people show up asking for patient navigation services, the more funding it will get. What people don't want to do is overbuild patient navigation services and not have patients ever call and ask questions. So for the advocacy foundations, it ends up being a great investment, if you will, because what we have seen in the Chordoma Foundation, and I'm just saying anecdotally, is patients who use patient navigation services are more likely to donate back and help other patients in the future. So it actually is, it's like a very positive feedback loop to use those services because people are happier, their family understands more about what's going on, they know what questions to ask to their physicians when they meet them. So that'd be my number one, although I don't know if you named off three more, I'd probably say those are also underutilized. There are lots out there.
So that sounds like that's one barrier to patients, facing patients with a cancer diagnosis. Just curious from your perspective, what are the other major barriers that are facing patients today?
Well, I mean, there are some really obvious painful ones, like there are insufficient resources to give adequate information to all the patients with complicated diagnoses. I think right now, what I see, at least in the spectrum of people that I know well who have cancer, I mean, outside of a professional relationship, is that the people who have money and resources will fly wherever they need to get the best advice. And the people who don't are just stuck wherever they are. And I think that is completely unfair, obviously, but also like, unsustainable. Because every patient who has money doesn't need to go to MD Anderson. And on the other end of that spectrum, people who don't have money might need to go to MD Anderson, or might need to go to Sloan Kettering, or might need to go to NCI or wherever. So insurance is obviously a major issue there. But one thing I like to tell people is if you're going to ask your friends and family for help at all, ask them for $100, compile those $100 into a couple thousand, and get at least one visit to one true expert in whatever you have. That one visit may prevent you from ever needing to see another expert again, right? So if you live, it doesn't matter where you live. If you live 200 miles from the next big NCI designated cancer center, if you get a consultation visit for your newly diagnosed cancer, and all they tell you is, your doctor has a great plan, go do it. That is such a load off, right? To say, oh, wow, this expert told me this is right. And that second opinion is worth, what's it worth? I mean, it's worth everything, right? You don't have to second guess all the decisions that are coming next. And I strongly recommend to people doing that as early as they can in their diagnosis, because now you have a relationship. And if you ever need to go back, you can email or call that physician's office, because they're you are their patient, and say, hey, look, it looks like this didn't go quite the way we thought. Do I need to come in, or can you tell me over email or whatever what you would do? Many doctors, not all, but many doctors are going to say, I would much rather just tell you what to do over email than have you drive 200 miles and come to a 45-minute visit and sit in the waiting room for 2 hours, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So obviously not all doctors can do that, and not all feel totally comfortable, but many of the true experts will do that. And I would definitely recommend people take advantage of second opinions. So when I think about it, it's like there are not enough true experts in every disease. You have to figure out who they are. You have to go find them, and you have to ask them for their opinion. And you don't have to stay there. You don't have to be treated there, but you do have to get that opinion once. Obviously, insurance is something we can't fix in this country. We haven't been able to fix it forever. It's a complete joke, but it's not a good joke. But it just doesn't seem like it's going to get better anytime soon. In fact, it seems like it's getting worse. It's worse for the doctors and for the patients. Those would be, really, really big ones that at least I think you can help to solve. So meaning you can't fix insurance problem, but you can round up with all your best friends and people, maybe get together the right amount of money to get the right opinion, and then be treated locally if that's your only option with your insurance.
Many doctors that I talk to, particularly doctors that are very patient-centric, will tell me they learn as much from their patients as they do from other colleagues. And I'm just curious if there are any lessons that stand out in your mind that you've learned from your patients.
What I didn't tell you when I was telling you my background, even though I told you a background for 15 minutes, so there's more to it, but I was seeing patients mainly in phase 1 clinical trials. So most of those patients are quite sick. They've run out of options for the most part. And one of the things I realized talking to many patients in that setting is that very few of them really understood what they were dealing with or understood why decisions had been made along the way. No one had ever just stopped to ask them, can you tell me why we are doing this? Right? Like, seems like an obvious question, but if a patient can't tell you in their own words why you're doing the things that you're doing, then you have not told them well enough what is at stake and what the decisions mean. So I'll give you one example of, there was a guy who had advanced pancreatic adenocarcinoma, which most people know is a really bad disease. And he was also maybe the coolest guy I've ever met. And just the easiest guy to talk to, super, super relaxed and fun and friendly, and never really let anything rattle him when he would be at visits or anything else. And it turned out at that time I was doing a lot of home projects, woodworking, and he was a woodworking expert, just like an absolute expert. He had his own shop and everything. And I think what I learned from him, his case was this is a really interesting case, is sometimes you can go looking for problems that only make decisions more complicated. So in this guy's case, he had a little headache. Somebody ordered an MRI. We found a tiny little metastasis in his brain. And before you know it, this guy's now off the treatment he had been on for the last 6 months, and he was happy, feeling good, no symptoms. And the rule of thumb in cancer is, well, if you find new disease, that's progression and you should do something about it. Well, I'm not sure that was to his benefit. So he comes off that treatment and his disease starts growing very, very quickly after that. There's no clinical trial endpoint that would have told us to do something different than what was done in that case. But on the other side, sometimes you have to say there is a real quality of, like, the quality of a patient's life is more important than whether or not a disease, like I can see a tiny little thing on a scan. And if we'd have kept him on that treatment, who knows? Maybe he would have lived another year of it growing really slowly, or maybe it would have grown really quickly. We have no idea. So I think his case taught me, one, you can be a fun, easygoing, great person no matter how bad things are, because he clearly had a lot on his plate. But two was, don't ask questions you don't want the answer to if you can't do anything about the answer. And in his case, I think that's one that I will think about probably for the rest of my career, is if you go looking for problems and you do too many scans and too many tests, you will find things that will just confuse you and make your decision-making process really, really difficult. Other things, try not to schedule really, really important visits right before somewhere when you have to be somewhere at a certain time. Like, they'll go long, and sometimes they have to, and you don't want to be the person who says, I really got to go. I know we're sending you to hospice, but I really got to go. Right? Like that, I've had that happen once. It was, I still think about that day. It was awful. Like, we had a flight to catch, and I was like, I have to leave. And also I'm setting you up to go to hospice tomorrow, right? Like, to inpatient hospice. Just a terrible way to end our, we had been patient caregiver for 3.5 years at that point. It was awful. So those are the two that stick with me the most. There are lots of other tiny lessons that add up to like the total amount of information you think about when you assess a patient's case, but it's more the personal things that I'd say you learn that you don't want to do again through seeing a lot of patients that are really sick.
So as someone who does deal with people who are sick, how do you balance that as a physician? What are the things that are there enough resources in place for physicians to deal with the hard topics that come as a result of their career?
Simple answer is no. Not at all. It's not even close. For some physicians, they don't fully engage on these things all the time. That's maybe a defense mechanism. For people who do, I think there is a fair amount of burnout. Some people have faith or philosophy or all kinds of approaches to how they deal with those difficult challenges, but no, well, I should take a step back. In medical school, we learned a lot about, how you can deal with difficult conversations, for instance. But it is a whole different thing when you're the person there, and you're not just dealing with how am I going to get through this conversation and convey the information, but somebody you've known for years, and now you're out of options. You have nothing else to offer them. And no, there is no resource for that. There's nothing that can prepare you for that. People talk about, accommodating physician burnout, but the truth is that's nonsense. Like that, none of that stuff is, and this is just my opinion, but none of that stuff works. The only thing that really works is for people to take some breaks and then get some perspective. And so, you can hear me talking about this. Like, I'd love to go practice medicine right now. I can't because I'm too busy with other stuff, but I would love to, despite all of that. But when I left NCI, I don't think I could have taken another month at that time. Yeah. I was worn out. So I think intermittent breaks, and I think it would be nice if in the medical profession that, the licensing and board certifications accommodated that a bit more too. There is no real normal path for that. It's expected that you continuously maintain all of these things all the time, which means you have to be seeing patients or going to lectures or whatever. And it's just not, I don't know how that goes with reality. I don't know how most doctors can keep that up over a long career. Obviously, I haven't done it, so I can't really speak to that.
What do you wish patients understood more about their doctors?
I think the most important thing you can realize is that doctors are just people, and people are all kinds of different people, right? Some care about people more than others. Some care about other things more than, what I think most people assume doctors only become doctors because they're great human beings, and that is not true. Some people are less so. And I think most doctors do go into medicine with the best of intentions, but life comes up over the course of time. And so, like I said, there might be, to protect their own emotions, they might try to create distance with patients, all kinds of things. The only other thing I would say is that some doctors are better at acknowledging what they do not know than others. And when you find a doctor who seems to have the answer for everything, they probably don't have the answer for much. Especially in cancer, I should say. I mean, in certain specialties of medicine, there are going to be doctors who literally know everything because it's knowable. The problem in oncology, in cancer, is that most things are unknowns. You're talking about risk and reward. You're talking about probability of success. You're not talking about absolutes. And anyone who fails to acknowledge that there is always uncertainty, I would be very concerned about that. That's one standing piece of advice I would give to any patient.
So you mentioned earlier the importance of seeking multiple opinions. When you're dealing with a difficult diagnosis like this, do you have any thoughts for patients on how they should, what characteristics they might want to look for in a physician to help them understand, if they've seen 3 physicians, kind of how to make those decisions regarding where to go for care?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I think you're very likely as a patient to get advice from friends and family. I love this doctor, I love that doctor, but every situation is really, really different. And so similar to the what I said earlier, I think it's really important to reach out to advocacy groups or patient-centered groups that are focused on the disease that you actually have, right? So someone who was cured of their, stage 1 breast cancer has a very different experience than someone who has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Those two things are not, they might be related in some ways, like the fear, right? The unknown, but the decision-making path is very, very different. And just because, this person went to this doctor and they did well, doesn't mean that that's the same outcome that you will have if you have a different disease in a different setting. So I think it's super important to first try to reach out to a disease-focused organization that focuses on your disease and can help navigate this situation. This is very difficult. If you have a loved one or, close contact who to be an expert in cancer, use them to but somebody who really wants to help you find the right person is first going to ask, what do you want to have happen? Right? Like the first, what is the probability of cure? What is the risks? What are the risks? What good could happen? What bad could happen? Then say, now, given all of these trade-offs, which things matter most to you? If no one asks you that question, I would probably find a different doctor. If no one's ever asked you, what do you care about what do you care about if it happens or does not happen? Then you're going to have a struggle if things don't go perfectly to plan. And a lot of times things do go perfectly to plan, but when they don't, you better have somebody who already knows what you care about.
That's great advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think in your mind, and this is probably one where you're going to say, oh goodness, there are so many, but what do you think are the top challenges facing the oncology industry in the US today?
Yeah, that one is a long list.
I told you you'd say there's so many.
Yeah, well, there's challenges and I would call it more like opportunities, right?
Sure.
Today is, we are in a period of abundance scientifically. We know more about cancer than obviously we ever have, but we know more almost in an exponential rate. Like we are learning so much so quickly. Probably the biggest challenge is integrating all that information into one cohesive strategy. And unfortunately, I don't think that the centralized resources that could impact these things most have a great strategy for how to pull everything together. So what I mean by that, and this is not a knock on anyone, obviously I have the highest regard for where I used to work at the NCI, but what the NCI could be doing today is, instead of giving individual grants to individual researchers who are really thoughtful and really smart and have great ideas, is connecting dots, right? They could be pulling together these individual ideas into a more cohesive strategy that actually we're not repeating effort and spending money 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 times, which I can tell you without a doubt, there are, every company that exists, plus almost all researchers, all have a lot of the same ideas, and then have to decide how to allocate resources based on their best guess of which thing is going to work. What if instead we pooled all those resources and took the greatest advantage of all of them, right? That's the biggest challenge. Now that sounds like insurmountable, and it kind of is. But imagine now if we treated the National Cancer Institute, the NIH funds, as we do almost any other investment strategy in this country. This is the country that essentially invented the ability to create markets and the ability to drive behavior through incentives. If somewhere along the line, somebody said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring this all together under one big umbrella and understand cancer at a greater depth, regardless of the subtype. We're going to understand gene expression. We're going to understand where these targets make sense and how to find patients that fit into these profiles. I think we would make progress so fast it would be scary. We'd also have to involve regulatory bodies in this conversation. We'd have to have a very thoughtful conversation. But change is very difficult in big government organizations. There are a lot of vested interests in keeping things the same way. And I don't mean like nefarious interests, just like people have their role and their responsibilities. And if you take a bunch of people who are really good at something and then you say, we're going to do everything totally differently, their first reaction is not like, why? That sounds exciting. It's like, no. It's just no. So, if patients want to see that happen, you have to go out and petition for it. You have to call Congress people and senators and say, this is how I think cancer care should, or how cancer research should be. This is the way I think it could make more sense. We need to pull all these things together and get the most out of it, not give individual little grants all over the place. I think that would really work. But as someone who has tried repeatedly to make things like that happen, I can tell you it is a steep road to even get people interested in those concepts, let alone to actually act on them.
What advice do you have for patients who are looking to be more than patients and who want to be actively involved in their cancer as an advocate? What type of advice do you have for people like us on the call today?
I'd say do it. You don't to be an advocate for other patients. You don't have to have a title. You don't have to do anything other than like be available to people. That's probably the most important thing you could do. Now, you do want to have a source of good information and you do want to build connections, but as Erica knows, because she's seen me do this, the most important thing you can do to be able to help a patient find the right thing for them is know a lot of people. You walk around in cancer meetings and you say, hey, nice to meet you. I read your paper. Can I ask you 3 dumb questions, right? And you would be surprised. Maybe you wouldn't be, but I found it surprising. Now that I've been in their role, I understand why. academic people love talking about themselves. You can tell, right? I love talking. I love talking about the stuff that I do, right? So, I mean, if a patient were walking around ASCO and saw somebody's name tag and said, "Hey, Dr. X, I just read your paper. I don't understand this, and this," that person would stop whatever they were doing and talk to you for 45 minutes. I promise you, because they'd be so taken aback, and they'd be able to tell that story when they got home, and they'd be so excited. So that'd be one thing, is try, don't sit on the sidelines, like just go. But I mean, really, realistically, I would say try to meet up with like-minded people who are doing something similar and volunteer to be a patient navigator. Whatever disease somebody has, like Julie, for you, right? Like in sarcoma, there are a number of foundations and that we used to just call sarcoma because we had no treatments, right? Yeah. And now we call sarcoma like 100 different things. And it's only through that better understanding of a patient's disease that a patient is going to make better decisions. And so if a patient is able to call a sarcoma advocacy foundation and say, "This is what I have, can you connect me to anyone else who has it, just so I could ask some really basic stuff?" Through that, you can have conversations with 10 people before you know it, and you're off to the races, learning things faster than you thought you could. So if patients want to do more, the most important thing you can do is be available and try. The next thing you'll find is that through those conversations, you'll learn all the things that you don't know. Because one of the hardest things about cancer is when you're diagnosed, you don't even know what you don't know, right? You have no idea where to start. So you have these conversations, you figure out a bunch of questions that just keep popping up for other people. And then before you know it, hey, you're somebody that people look to, and you can get on a phone call with an expert like we do on these calls, right?
Yep.
It sounds so linear, but I think people would be surprised how much experts would love to talk to patients about stuff like this and be able to communicate to more patients so that they can communicate to other patients. I think that's what I love about this concept for One Cancer Place. I think it's exactly what we need. We need to create, more of a community that can educate each other and, jump right in. Just try. Email somebody at One Cancer Place and ask. That might be the best next step.
That's great. Well, thank you. So we have come to the end of my list of questions. I did want to turn it over to Sarah or Erica to see if there were any questions in the chat.
I'm really not shocked that you started out saying you wanted to teach. We are all absolutely blown away by what an incredible teacher you are to us. And it seems so organic and easy for you. And now that you've told us your story, we understand it a little bit better. I think we have benefited in the cancer world greatly by that desire of yours to teach and to figure out how to teach your best stuff. And you are definitely doing that with and for us as we encounter each new guest expert that we bring into for conversation with One Cancer Place. I don't honestly have any questions, but one does percolate here a little bit. I'd like you to just for this audience, I don't know how much you can tell us, but I remember telling you that I had heard about you from Rachel. And can you tell us a little bit about her story without maybe revealing who she was and that encounter that you had? Because I saw a picture of her recently, and I want to bring her story out to the world a little bit. Am I putting you in a bad place?
I mean, no, I remember her so well. I think when you're starting out in medical training, the funny thing is you rarely see somebody that is the same age you are, right? I mean, so what stood out to me about her was we were the same age. I mean, we were in the same stage of life. We were both dealing with a lot of the same other things. She just had this whole cancer thing on top of it all, right? So she was also just super smart and thoughtful and, very, very funny in a very nuanced way. And, her case was a really difficult one. She was up for trying anything. She could understand very complicated scientific concepts. And we talked a lot about something I try to reserve for patients who are very conversational about their very well informed about their cancer, which is using a series of phase 1 trials in a way that may be more than additive. So this is a conversation that's well beyond sort of the scope of my background, but one of the things I love to think about is the complexity of an immune response against a tumor. It's part of all the research I worked on and still do. And when you think about how the immune system can respond to and kill a cancer cell, a lot of things have to happen in the right order. And in her case, we knew that probably none of those things had happened in any order, right? So in order then to solve one problem, you actually had to solve all the problems, which is obviously a very difficult task. You have very limited resources with which to try to do that. But she was one of the few patients, Tom Marsillier being another, that we could talk about. What if we did this thing that'll solve the first problem potentially, this thing that might solve the second problem potentially, and this thing that might solve the last problem? And if they all work perfectly, maybe you can have a great response. But independently, we don't really believe any of those things would work on their own. So as you can imagine, trying to explain that to a patient who is new to biology is not a good conversation to have. It's overwhelming, but she could have those conversations, and partially because she had come from Dr. Marshall, who is also a great teacher, physician who can really help people understand some of these concepts. So yeah, I mean, I love interacting with patients who are in that situation, because it's really an exciting conversation to have. That doesn't mean I think I need to spend more time and energy on patients who don't understand any of it, right? Because that's much more critical, that you get a baseline understanding for the patients who don't. But conversations with patients who are really up on the science really does open a different series of doors. And so now they don't always work, but if somebody is committed to understanding the science, One Cancer Place might be a good place to, Live might be a good place to start to get that background. And then before you know it, you might be able to have those conversations that are a little more in depth with your physician. So I will also say some physicians won't, if you go that deep, some physicians won't know what you're talking about. So you have to be a little careful, but you probably want to have those conversations with real experts on those topics, right? Not every physician knows immunology that well, for instance. So
that is precisely the point that you were making about how important it is that we go back into our networks, where I like to say, finding our people who are in a similar situation as we are, with maybe the same subtype or the same type, same stage, whatever it is, maybe even the same locale, and say, your best advice about who I can go talk to, who's really the most passionate, best student of my disease.
Correct.
Who do you vote for? And gather the votes, because the community will tell us who the best practitioners are for me, the ones that I want to find. So I really appreciate that advice. We all are so lost when we are diagnosed, as you pointed out. My first impulse, and by the way, I'm celebrating 20 years Dancing with Ned from colon cancer this week in a couple of days.
Wow.
And I am one of the very fortunate ones because I really didn't do what I should have done, but I do remember that my impulse was that I needed to find my people, and I couldn't find my people at that time. So I basically went through the whole experience alone, with the exception of I did get a second opinion 20 years ago because a friend made me do it. Anyway, I'm talking a little bit too much about my story. I really want to talk about Rachel, Tom, and Conradin, who are all passed from this world, but who were exquisite teachers of our disease to all of us, and how to navigate. They taught us how to navigate for themselves in such a beautiful, wonderful, profound way. And I want them never to be forgotten. So I'm really happy for the opportunity to talk about that right now. And someone else, so kudos, honors to Rachel, Tom, and Conradin and Basel.
Yeah, I just add on, it was kind of passing from my memory that Rachel had that blog, and, so many people looked up to her.
She was lovely.
I think actually I would go read her blog after our visits to be like, I wonder what I got, like what was confusing, right? It was an interesting thing. So I could say, oh, how did that actually go from her perspective? The other thing that I would do when I was relatively early in my career is I would ask people to read their notes from our visits and say, what did I get wrong? Because you'd be surprised, number one, how few people even read their own notes, and how often doctors make mistakes by copying something in from a previous note or whatever. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but it really teaches you the things that are so easy to make major mistakes on. And sometimes saying less is better than saying more. I think a lot of doctors put a lot of information for billing purposes, but a lot of it is fluff, and it's not necessarily verified, and it ends up confusing people. But Rachel was so good at all of those things. I mean, she really was able to, and I think, she would probably be the person we would look to as the guidepost of someone who could connect, a patient who has no idea what's going on with complicated physician speak. Tom, as smart as he was so smart that it was sometimes harder to keep up with Tom. But yeah, what an amazing couple of people that we had the great fortune to know. Well,
we who work with patients, as I do, have the extraordinary experience of being able to know people at a stage in our lives when we are at our best. Actually, we are the most authentic people at that stage of life. And so it's truly a privilege. I'm sure that you reflect on that in your practice, that you're dealing with people at their very finest, and it's such an honor and privilege. A question has come up, total change here, from one of our patients in attendance here. And the question is, do you think that any of your children will follow in your footsteps?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that'd be cool, I guess, if they do, but I want them to do what they are interested in and what they're good at. I don't really have that much interest. I don't think you learn by osmosis oncology concepts. So if they do become interested in science, for sure we will have a lot of conversations as they go through their careers. But the oldest of them is 12. It's still very early to tell what they want to do. They talk about wanting to be a veterinarian, but mainly so that they can hug horses. I don't really know if those are real career goals yet. But it is interesting watching kids. I'm sure everyone who has kids feels the same way. They can be not interested in anything, and then all of a sudden there's something that captures their imagination and they just grab onto it. I have not seen that with medicine and oncology with any of my kids yet. So we'll see. We'll see. I certainly didn't know where I was going when I was 22.
I didn't know where I was going when I was 50 or 60. Not until I had cancer myself did I recognize what I was doing in this life. I can honestly say that I wish that you had been my parent as a kid, because I think your leadership in your life and your humanity in your life is such a wonderful role model. I might have, my biggest regret is that I didn't follow a scientific path, because I'm fascinated by it today. I was one of those students who purely followed the social sciences and learned how to speak French. Like that was going to be meaningful to people. It helped me a lot when I lived in Paris, but it doesn't necessarily help in life or with helping people. So I encourage you to keep on being the brilliant physician and scientist and teacher that you are, because I'm here to swear that your lessons are being imparted as you live your life. Your kids live their lives with you and watch you, because they are. And I think they're really fortunate. So that's what I'm going to say.
I need the recording of this so I can show them whenever they're mad at me.
You'll be able to. So Monterey, you are the person that we specifically asked Dr. Chris to come and join us for this conversation. I know that you have a couple of questions.
One of them would be is, when you are dealing with cancer patients all day, how do you leave that back at the office when you enter into your house?
I never did. So honestly, it was, I was joking a little bit. I mean, it's also partially true about why I left NCI, because we couldn't afford to live there anymore. But the other part was I was really exhausted. I mean, I gave patients my email address and my phone number, and they could text me or email me. And that is really hard, especially if your patient is in Iowa or San Diego, right? Which a lot of my patients traveled for our clinical trials. So, somebody emails you at 11 o'clock on a Saturday and says, I think I have a fever. And, you're like, well, you need to get to the emergency department, but you're sending an email, which isn't a great way to communicate an emergency response. And now you have to figure out now you have to open your computer, find their phone number, call them at home and say, you need to go to the emergency department, right? Like you can imagine that's exhausting. And some people would say, well, just don't check your email on a Saturday night then. But I didn't see that as a real solution. So I never could figure it out, honestly. I know people usually will figure out a system to make it better. And certainly I created a system where there was a layer for emergencies to go through before they came to me over time. But still, if a patient really needed me, I wanted to be available. So that's really hard when you go on vacation with little kids. So simple answer is I did not figure it out. I know other people have, but it didn't seem sustainable to me. And that was another reason why I felt like getting away from clinical practice for a while was a reasonable thing to do. Like I said, I would love to be able to do both at the same time, but it's a really hard thing to manage.
One other thing is, I wanted to take the opportunity personally to thank you, because a person who has, gone through stage 4 colon cancer and was told, but literally, I didn't have much hope to survive. And I proved everybody wrong with the help of my oncologist. But there was a lot of things I didn't understand until I was able to listen to you and during live. It seemed like whenever you took a break to explain something that was happening, it was honestly the time that I didn't know what was going on. So I wanted to thank you. I'm so happy that Erica convinced you to come in so we could interview you, and you just made my life a lot happier. So thank you.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. Thanks.
I have a question. how important of a role do you think psycho-oncology should have in diagnosis? Like, because when my husband was diagnosed, he was the guy, just super laid back, super great guy, took everything in a stride and never asked his oncologist any questions. And I was the one that was constantly just grilling her for every decision she made. Not out of, it was out of fear, probably more than anything. But, having your whole mortality handed to you on a, plate, do you think that there are enough resources available to somebody who's?
No, I don't. I mean, what I just told you was sort of the practical things that you could do, but the initial shock and confusion, I think, is weeks at least before people even start to internalize. And by that time, usually decisions are already being made. And I do think as caregivers, if there were a message to get out, it's like somebody has to be the person who starts to create a project plan and action items and does stuff. Because otherwise stuff will be done for you and you have no input.
Right.
And that's very easy for somebody to say. It's really hard for somebody to do, but somewhere along the line, a patient needs to find that person who can just be their doer, right? Like not a lot of opinions, not a lot of, I think we should do this or that, but just, I need you to take notes. I need you to write down all the things that we have to do after this visit. I need you to write down all my questions and make sure I ask them all. And if I have a follow-up question that I think of later, I need to put that in an organized, like, you just need somebody who can just do stuff. And I mean, the crazy thing is there is no resource for that, right? There's no insurance coverage for you as the caregiver to take time off work to go be with your husband to make sure that he's not missing a key point, right? Or, whatever. Like I do that now for my father-in-law for a different thing. He doesn't have cancer. But you cannot believe, if you've never been a patient, how much people will just talk right through the most important thing that is happening and not even pause to see if you wrote it all down or know what they mean. And like, I'm a doctor, like doctor in like major settings, and the people will be like, "Oh, you just go to the scheduler and you call it." And I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, for me, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? Like, I have no idea what you're saying. You're talking about this as if I do what you do every day, and I do not.
Right.
So either you can have somebody come in this room and walk me through every little bit of it and we'll do it together, or write it all down and I'm going to call you if I don't get it right. And then they're like, okay, I'm going to slow down because I don't want you calling me.
Right.
It's usually what happens. And I do tell people all the time, if your doctor isn't like listening to your concerns and giving you the right, tell them they're going to call them when they're on call if you don't get your answer, because nobody wants to be called when they're on call.
Good to know.
Yeah, but no, I mean, to answer your question, definitely there are not enough resources, but I don't have a great solution for that. I think, I think joining those, most academic centers do have, the groups where you can get together with other patients and talk through things. But my guess, I've never been to one of those. My guess is a lot of times those end up just being people crying, and there's not a lot of practical discussion there about what do I do next and who do I call for this or whatever. So I don't have a great answer for that. What I tried to do when I would see a patient with a given disease and I knew another patient who had been through the same thing is I would ask that other patient, do you mind if I give this person your contact information?
See, I would like to see that in a hospital setting, like a One Cancer Place type of, you know, setting in a hospital, that patients don't necessarily have to, but it's there if you need us, it's there if you want to talk to anyone with your, that would be.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, these two guys, if they heard me say this, would know exactly who I'm talking about, but they're these two guys, couldn't be more different, had the same diagnosis. And I introduced, you know, with one's permission, introduced them to each other. And they are like best friends now. And they still are. It's really the funniest thing because, you know, one's like super academic genius guy, and one's just this great guy who likes riding motorcycles in the desert. Now they're definitely going to know who I'm talking about if they watch this. And they are like real buds, and they'll call me when they're together. I think it's really funny.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that's actually something maybe One Cancer Place could take as an initiative, is to create this model at academic centers where it's not just the groups that get together, but people can anonymously sign up, say, hey, if somebody's in my situation, I'm happy to meet with them one-on-one and talk about, you know, sort of like what I went through, where are the decisions, what are the things I wish I had known. It's a great idea. I don't think it's going to be some systematic creating a curriculum thing that solves this, though.
No, I don't either.
So I would interject, Dr. Chris, that's precisely what we're building. That and navigation together, you know, the welcoming funnel, if you will, for the brand new diagnosed, who just is the beginning of the whole process, and the caregivers, the families, anybody that now knows that they don't know what they don't know, and then also to help them navigate. Our number one pillar leading out in, you know, undergirding One Cancer Place is actually navigation. We're building a very robust navigational pillar with different steps according to what a patient's looking for, caregivers might be looking for. Try to lead them through all the steps, because we all know we all come at this differently, at different rates and with different situations. And we as the helpers, if you will, who want to help, need to be able to meet people where they are. So that's what we will be doing our best to do.
Yep, totally. I think that's what's so exciting about what we're trying to do here, is that, you know, this is a huge unmet need. And I don't think money is the solution here. I think it's creating the right group of people that can add more people and more people to the mix, and having a backbone resource like these, the live calls with experts for people to be able to refer back to. I guess the other thing was we have to make a catalog of all the concepts. Get to work on that next, Erica.
Oh yeah, right. Oh, I'm just thrilled with the level of expertise and brilliance that are coming together for our conversations on live.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's stunning to me, and I realize that they're all very kind of long and involved, and there's stuff that we can do to make the experience a little more palatable. But by and large, your presence in each of these is so special, because you do such a beautiful job of teaching what the conversation is about. And none of us can thank you enough for participating in the way that you are with us in taking on this challenge. It is a challenge to take on the world of the new cancer patient, the new cancer families, we should say, who don't know where to turn. We hope to be there when they're ready to turn to learn more and follow some of your exquisite advice. I'm going to do my best to write in the description all the points that you did make, not the least of which is that we all need doers. You have a real gift for taking an important concept and turning into a short phrase that you can grab. And I'm going to do my best to try and describe this particular session in particular with your comments, your guidelines, if you will. Does anyone else have any questions? We have lots of questions, actually, Dr. Chris. They will continue because, as everyone knows, our live productions continue. Our next one is scheduled for in a week, next week, actually, September 2nd, with Dr. John Powderly from the Carolina Bio-Oncology Clinic, where he has a focus on phase 1 clinical trials. So patients that are looking for trials at first-line treatment can go to that clinic and learn probably a lot more quickly about all the trials for their disease, which is a really important thing for each of us to do as patient learners. Dr. Chris, this has been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for doing this with us and for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You deserve.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me be part of what you're building. We're building together. It's very exciting and hopefully helps a lot of patients and their loved ones along the way.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me say to everybody in attendance, thank you for joining us today. And let me in particular thank our funding partners, the Seagen Company out of Seattle and Mirati Therapeutics out of San Diego, Natera, and they're all over the country, main offices in California. The Colon Cancer Coalition helps us, and also the Colorectal Cancer Alliance helps us. Thank you to all of you KAPAs in attendance, and thank you for your daily attendance and attention paid to our new patients as they join us in One Cancer Place. Thanks, everyone.